I would say soul searching is probably the most valuable thing that someone can do. And then being really open to what kind of emerges from who you really are, what you want to spend your time doing. So again, I don't think there's a right answer, but it's really about the right questions. Where do I thrive? Where can I bring the insights that I've developed? What kind of community do I want to be a part of? And then just knowing that it's going to be a hard path. So find those people that can give you joy and sustain you as you go through that work.
So hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Changing Reality. We are so excited to bring you a wonderful interview with Yasmina, who is the Chief Development and Partnership Officer at Acumen. Yasmina, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for coming to my office and interviewing me.
First of all, I have to say I'm terribly offended you didn't tell me how beautiful your office is. It totally jump scared me. This is horrible. So we're going to abandon the interview for a second and I'm going to zero in on one thing you said when we kind of, walked in, is that you have this beautiful seated sofa area. And you say you have your weekly meetings there. Is that true, first of all? Tell us about the lie here.
It's true. If you'd come in yesterday, you would have seen a bunch of people gathered together, which is something we do every either Monday or Tuesday, depending on where in the world people are sitting. And we call it our Tuesday morning meeting. And it's a chance for people to come together, share what they're working on. We have an incredible, diverse, cool team. And everyone gives a little update on what their team is working on. And then at the end, we do something that's very Acumen. We have something called ahas and values in action. And so an aha is someone who has some reflection, something that kind of struck them about what's going on in the world. It could have been a documentary, or maybe they just came back from the School World Forum, and they'll share just a reflection with the group. And they'll also take the opportunity to recognize others on the team. I like it because every office does it. So we have people doing it in Nairobi, in Lagos, in Bogotá, and then they share it out and we all get to see what people are thinking about.
Amazing. And you said ahas and values in action. And I'm gonna harp on that a second because I never bring this up, but I'm actually a positive psychology major. So the whole VIA, values in action, it's like we have entire semesters dedicated to that.
Wow.
So to put you on the spot here,
what are the values?
Yeah, what are your values? If you were to like zero in on yourself, what do you think is your top, VIA character strength?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to stall for a second and share a little bit Acumen's values, and then I'll share my own.
Very important as well. Only second to your own. There you go.
And part of it is I work in a values-driven organization, and that's a reflection of certainly my own values. So the way Acumen thinks about its values is we have values intention, where we acknowledge that there are things that are really, really important, but often have sort of a counterbalanced value. And to really live those values, you have to kind of keep them in a sort of balance and acknowledge that tension. So as an example, we would have generosity and accountability.
Ooh.
So, we want to do good in the world. We want to support people that are early in their careers as entrepreneurs. We want to really kind of show up and be generous for folks. At the same time, we want to really foster accountability. We want to work with people that hold themselves to a high standard of integrity around social impact, around financial performance. And it can feel really tense at times. So if you're working with an entrepreneur and you're saying, wow, you haven't really hit some of the milestones we talked about, we need to dig into that, see what needs to change. They could say, why can't you just be more forgiving and more generous? And we're like, we don't want to be generous and support you, but we also want to have accountability. So that's just one example. And I think holding values intention is key. I think for me personally, probably something that's changed over time in life, but right now a really important one for me is authenticity.
Yeah.
I think just feeling like, in a world where truth feels like it's relative or people feel a lot of pressure to conform to certain expectations, to show up in a certain way. I think finding spaces and ways and communities where people can really show up as who they are and be authentic is something that I really value right now.
That's the end of the interview. There's nothing more beautiful that can be said. You're making this very hard. But first of all, I love the idea of values intention because I think as social entrepreneurs specifically, talking about the world of social impact, that is in itself a dichotomy, that itself is almost an oxymoron, social entrepreneurship. You want to do good, you want to be able to generate revenue or profit or at least sustainability. so that the good can perpetually continue and it can grow. And I feel like ignoring sometimes, the whole dichotomy of social entrepreneurship kind of sets us a step back. We're always kind of, linking to your point about authenticity, we're always kind of beating around the bush about it. So the fact that you, as an organization, call it out, is first of all, very genuine and very thoughtful. And second of all, it's very authentic in and of itself. So you're the right place and the right organization. We've gotten that down. And I'm just so curious, how on earth did you, number one, find such an organization that reflects the values that you're thinking about, that is so much at the pioneer of social impact work and social entrepreneurship itself? And I assume you have a grand plan for all of this. You always knew social impact was right in college. You were like,
I knew exactly what I was going to do, because social entrepreneurship wasn't even a concept at the time.
You invented it. You coined the term.
I worked for someone who did invent it. Ashoka. And I do think that he rightfully needs to be credited with having created that profession. And I think now there's a whole movement and organizations that really embrace the idea. For me, I would say it was sort of a circuitous path. My family, I think these stories of origin always connect back to your family. On my dad's side was several generations of entrepreneurs, and so really appreciated just that idea of almost creating something out of nothing and building out of either hardship or uncertainty a great opportunity and a great business. And on my mother's side, it was all UN, basically.
Oh, actually.
My grandfather was from Sweden, and he moved to Geneva to work for the World Health Organization, and basically everyone on that side of the family worked for the UN in some capacity. So this, in my head, this idea of being global in your view, understanding how interconnected we are, but also the idea that business is a really powerful tool just was kind of there. So when I went to college, my dream was to become an actress. That was the plan.
I can see it.
I mean, I think what I've learned is that storytelling and communication, it's all kind of part of the mix of how you can create impact. But while I was in college, I learned a little bit about history of Venezuela, which is where my father was born, and some of the political issues that came up around essentially unsustainable development. So I was studying things like comparative economics and history of Latin America, colonization, exploitation, and it all sort of formed together in this soup of seeing how basically a lot of people have been duped into thinking that development was really about supporting the lives of vulnerable people, when in fact it was about building markets or creating some different kind of balance of trade, tapping into low-cost resources and labor. I got very upset. And in a way that I think is true of college students in general, you can feel things very deeply, which is why, absolutely, and I think colleges can continue to be a place where people's real search for justice and search for truth can catalyze all of society. So for me personally, I was just very mad that we were using this framework of development in a way that continued to perpetuate sort of a neo-colonialism. And I thought, I think I'm going to be mad about this for the rest of my life. And I think I'm going to let that shape my career. So I've told people who are kind of trying to figure out, how do you decide what to work on in a world where there's so many issues and causes? I say, what really makes you mad? What's that thing that you just cannot put out of your head? It just gets under your skin and you just feel like you have to do something about it.
I've never heard that before. We'll get that on a t-shirt for you. What really makes you mad? Okay, and the world has lost an actress because of it.
Yes, it really did pull me off the path.
There you go.
So when I left college, I was looking for opportunities to have impact right away. I went into the corporate sector, doing environmental management consulting, and I believed that big companies could really help deal with some of these problems in the world, but I don't think I had the patience for it at the time.
As college students are famously known for, our patience.
At that point, I was in my early 20s, and I met people that seemed like they were already so burnt out. And I'm like, I believe in like moving the big ship, but I was like, I don't know if I can handle doing this for decades. And so I learned about Ashoka, which was a radically different approach to social impact. It wasn't moving the big ship. It was just David and Goliath, go after the problem, even if you have no resources. And I was so inspired by Bill Drayton, by the Ashoka Fellows. And at the same time, I thought, but it would be nice if they did have resources. it would be nice if they had more support. And obviously, civil society is something that has existed for a long time, and we were always thinking about how to help Ashoka Fellows raise money, but I was super curious about the ones that had business models. And it was a smaller number. I think that's changed over time, but I just found myself wanting to understand, like, how do you build a business model around building a more sustainable and inclusive society? So I went to business school with that question in mind.
Stanford, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, Stanford, which, I suffered through, but it was a real privilege. And it turns out I've worked now for 3 people who were in the same class at Stanford, all of whom got public management program certificates, all of whom dedicated their lives to social impact. So that had a big influence on my decision to go there. And at business school, I tried to start to understand, like, how might you use the tools of investment, of growing businesses, to tackle these issues of sustainability and inclusion. And Ashoka was sort of in my head, but then Acumen was born sort of at that time. So 2001, Jacqueline Novogratz founded Acumen, and I joined when it was 2 years old, when I got out of business school.
So today we know Acumen is the powerhouse around the world, and you were one of those early drivers. You made the impact really happen from day one. And there's so many things that I've got to unpack there, so I'm going to go bit by bit. And the first thing that I want to touch on is, you said something that was very poignant, that, I wanted to steer the ship, but I didn't know if, I could move the whole thing, and I didn't know if I want to spend the whole of my career doing that. And I want to bring that up because I have been talking to friends, especially recently, who just graduated, went into big company jobs, and then went, but I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can become that burnt out person I'm seeing. I want to make an impact now, in a sense. And a lot of them are in that position where, they want to leave their jobs, or they want to figure out, what's the next step for them. There's a lot of fear in it, in a sense. Did you have any fear at that point in your career? And how did you navigate that? How did you even think through those positions and decide where your next step was?
Yeah, I think it wasn't so much fear, but it was often this, like, deep question about what should I be doing with my time and talent that will matter. And I feel like there's been a really exciting evolution in the past, 25, 30 years, where what sector you're in doesn't say as much about the kind of impact you can have as it used to. And so I think it used to be that if you want to have an impact, you go work for a nonprofit. And I think that's really changed. I think that you can now take that same drive for impact and work in a company, start a company, work in the public sector. And it's still, every single one of them will have its own challenges, but I feel like there's a deeper understanding now that it will take all of these different kinds of organizations to create systemic change. So then the question is, you still have to ask yourself these deep questions of, where will I contribute? Where can I make a difference? And I think for anyone who's looking for, that sort of easy path, the shortcut, a terrible news.
Oh no.
There isn't one.
Hold on to your seats, guys.
It's not good news. However, whatever path you choose, knowing that it will be a difficult path and it'll have its own challenges, I think choosing a path that is sort of true to who you are. So I meet people that are in banking, or in consulting, or in communications, or in the arts, and each of them is on a path of impact, but it's something where they feel like their strengths, their talents, the things they studied can really come together. So I would say soul searching is probably the most valuable thing that someone can do. Listening and having conversations, which I know you've dedicated yourself to, and then being really open to what kind of emerges from who you really are, what you want to spend your time doing. And the other thing I found for myself was I did work in corporate consulting. I learned so much from it. I met mentors who I'm still in touch with today, and I've taken that knowledge with me everywhere I've gone. So I led corporate partnerships at Acumen for 10 years using all of that knowledge. So I didn't want to sit inside a consultancy or inside a large company like Ford Motor Company, who I was advising for about a year. But I said, I want to take those insights and I want to apply them in a different setting. So again, I don't think there's a right answer, but it's really about the right questions. Where do I thrive? Where can I bring the insights that I've developed? What kind of community do I want to be a part of? And then just knowing that it's going to be a hard path. So find those people that can give you joy and sustain you as you go through that work.
When did you start feeling, because I feel like we all start our careers hopefully at some level as generalists almost, and then, at least for me, maybe I'm not as self-aware as some of our audience members, but I try everything and go like, oh, I'm very bad at that. I'm not too shabby at that one. And the one that I suck the least in is the one that I tend to gravitate towards. You started your career, I'm sure, much more successfully, and I know one of your first roles here was in their water portfolio. And then again, today, obviously, you've grown so much from it.
I definitely decided I was terrible at that. And
Did you? Okay.
No,
thank God.
I mean, I think that my career has had so many pivots, and I think the way you describe it is spot on, that it's sort of like...
Share your story, come on.
It's great to be learning, and that's sort of a euphemism for failing over and over again, and then it's like, maybe I could be better at something else. So yeah, when Acumen started... they made the insane decision to hire me as a portfolio manager, and Jacqueline and I still laugh about it because it was pretty obvious I wasn't qualified for the job, but that's what they were looking for. And for me, it was an incredibly powerful training ground. I was working for 4 years, identifying and investing in water and sanitation businesses. And, it was a very new sector, so it's not like there was a bazillion people who were qualified for that job because it was new. But I just knew that there were other people that could do that job better than I could. And I pivoted to focusing on our communication strategy because we realized that while we're really focused on building entrepreneurs that can solve problems of poverty, that this was a new idea. And so figuring out how to share that idea, how to get more entrepreneurs excited about this, more investors to the table, more philanthropists was really an important part of our model. So we made communications and storytelling just a big part of who we are. Again, I wasn't particularly qualified for that job either. My main qualification was I really liked talking about Acumen, and I still do. But I was in that job for 6 years, and I learned all about social media, which was emerging at the time, mainstream, conventional media. We got Jacqueline on the cover of Forbes magazine, where it said, social innovation will change the world. I was like, check that box. That's great. Learn just what works, what doesn't. Essentially, with communications, you can never do enough. I'm sure if you had a big budget, you would make your podcast the most widely viewed podcast in the universe.
It's true. I would make it mandatory screening in all schools. That's
Yes,
what I do.
Exactly.
That's my public service to the world.
I think it would be brilliant if it were. But again, there was just a lot of lessons. And one of the lessons was, as we matured as an organization, let's hire a professional. And so what I've been able to do at Acumen is to pivot into spaces that we're innovating, to learn from them, and then to kind of go from there. And I guess people ask me all the time, like, why have I been at Acumen for so long? This is my 22nd year. I think it's because I've been able to learn and grow with the organization. I've been able to bring in new ideas. And so it just keeps it really fresh and interesting. It's one of the things I hear from people all the time when they're trying to decide on a career. What can I do that will allow me to learn? Which I think is a great thing to sort of make a career driver, and I've definitely had that experience here.
Before this interview, I joked that you were giving me all the questions, but you actually are very good at coming up with questions that are my favorite type of questions, which are the unanswerable questions.
Yeah.
The questions you can, spend life pursuing the answers for. So I'm going to write all of this down and I'm going to send it back to you. Just like you can start a philosophy book.
Nice.
Based on all of
pre-written.
This. It's pre-written. Oh no. See, you're doing, okay. On that note, the other thing that I really like that you mentioned is that, we do great work. We need to be able to communicate that. And not always do we have the big box office budget to do so. Yeah. I think that really resonates with a lot of social entrepreneurs, and I think it really resonates with sometimes a lot of student entrepreneurs. There's this sense of scrappiness, whether we like it or not. And we have limited resources, but often, especially those in the impact world, have great stories to tell. Any tips of how we can start thinking about, what are the most effective communication strategies, or what are just ways we can get the stories out there, in a world that is very flooded with information, I will say.
Absolutely. Well, and it's just such a dynamic space, like what communications is and means keeps changing. But I do think we're living in a time, some people call it like the long tail, where there's so many different small audiences that you can connect with rather than the big audience. right? Just the number of channels and websites, even the kinds of social media platforms that people use. So it's very fragmented, which is sort of daunting, but I also think it's an opportunity for people to find their audience. And so understanding like who are the people in a sense that are searching for you and how do you get to those people? And it can be very, I don't know, sort of organic, right? I think having a student podcast, connecting with students, it's like a place where people are hungry for a perspective that they can relate to, maybe more so than a mainstream media channel. So I think for people to bring their own story in authentic ways, to really explore these new channels is super smart. When we started out, our view was like, we would love the whole world to know about us, but what really matters is that people that are asking tough questions about how we can tackle poverty in innovative ways is what we really need. And so you go get very specific about who's talking about that, who's thinking about that, who needs to understand that, where are they showing up, which events, and you build that organic audience that's based on like a much more specific area of interest versus the mass audience of people who may not really be aligned or able to help spread the idea that you're trying to get out into the world.
No, that is actually very helpful and productive advice, because I think sometimes, like, as you said, the dauntingness is I have to talk to everyone, like everyone is there, everyone is a potential listener, can be hard.
Yeah.
Almost what's your beachhead customer in some ways, as an entrepreneur would say, who are the people that is your target audience and how do you kind of bring them to the conversation? I'm curious, just moving on, like following that thread of conversation. The other thing that you mentioned, okay, part of your work was in corporate partnerships. Part of your work now is still partnerships. That communications piece, I'm sure, is still very strong there. And it involves, I'm sure, talking to many different types of people, often in an intersectional lens, because Acumen is really, really good about tackling issues at the root cause. And that often doesn't fit into a box. That like, in this, again, the tiny work that I do as a social entrepreneur, we often go and when we apply for grants and everything, they're like, listen, we like you kids. It's just that which category do we put you in? Like, yeah. And I think of many foundations out there and of many funders, Acumen does a great job of keeping that a little bit more open. I'm sure that's very reflective of you and the leadership's intentionality to bring out that intersectionality when you approach people that you work with. On the flip side, I'm sure that makes your job very hard. I'm sure you're talking to many people and you have to educate, you have to, again, get them all to agree to a certain extent, and you have to kind of build those bridges. So,
that's a perfect description of my job.
Sorry, thank you for your service. Tell me a little bit about how the process of bringing all these people together, and in a way having to educate them that things are not as clear cut if we actually want to make an impact. How do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that I am so persuasive that I can meet someone and convince them that what we're doing is the right thing.
If you did, you wouldn't be here. You'd be on TV, I assume. Exactly. You'd have a TV show.
I think that there's this sort of balancing act of being really clear about who we are, what we want to achieve, things that we'll never veer away from, but then also kind of meeting people where they are. And a lot of it just comes from listening. So if we are talking to someone, it sort of depends a little bit on whether it's someone who works, say, in a big foundation where they have a mandate, they have a set of goals that they're trying to achieve, and we really have to discern whether or not our goals and their goals align. I can explain to them how we work and how it helps us achieve those goals, but I can't tell them that their goals aren't the right goals, right? Because it's not really whoever I'm talking to, it's not up to them. So a lot of it is just really understanding how do you build trust, understand what other people see as success so that you can navigate those relationships. And what I found is when you're building a partnership, it's not just about getting to yes, right? So it's not like convince someone to say yes, but we're going on a long journey with organizations who support us. And so really it's about how do we build something that we're both going to want to stay in, be proud of, and talk about and celebrate, and maybe even repeat in the future. So getting to yes is not the success. It's actually going through that whole journey of delivering that result, learning together, and being able to look back at the whole thing and say, yeah, that was what we both wanted it to be. So again, being slick or persuasive doesn't really solve the problem. What I think is really important right now, as we're living in a world where aid is changing or being pulled back, there's a lot of hesitation, a lot of uncertainty, that this is a moment where people who have the resources, the influence, the voice to stand up for social impact really need to do that. And so to me, it's less about convincing people about Acumen and more within this space of international development, addressing issues of poverty, even climate, which shouldn't be a controversial topic. It's helping people feel like it's still okay. In fact, more important than ever, to stand up, to stand with vulnerable people, to stand with LGBTQ, to stand up and talk about climate. And so, again, I think of it less as an exercise in persuasion and sometimes listening. Like, where are people coming from? What are they worried about? How do they want to make a difference in the world? And can we facilitate that? Because if someone's really worried about, what's going on in the United States right now, we want to make sure we're talking to them about the things that we're doing here in the U.S. that can help them feel like they're doing what they need to do, and it's aligned with, their values.
I really like that perspective, because I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, we think the yes is what matters. And I think, it's a very business thing, which is like, I have to close the sale.
Yeah.
And you're very right. In social entrepreneurship, it's not as much of a sale as it is a partnership, and that is a completely different lens that I think we need to get educated in a little bit. And I appreciate you kind of pointing that out.
It's hard.
You have a tough job. I'm not going to lie. It's like you have like 5 jobs combined into one. I do not know how your brain kee't track of all of this information. I hope there's a spreadsheet involved somewhere. On that note, you talk a lot about just kind of, the bringing of people together. That's amazing. The other thing that you guys do very interestingly is, again, the hybrid way that you kind of look at capital.
Mm-hmm.
When I meet a lot of social entrepreneurs, wonderful people, but they often tend to look at, am I a for-profit or a non-profit? Like, the world can seem very cut and dry. It's like either I'm raising from a VC or I'm, raising from a foundation. There isn't much conversation, as probably to our audience, this is the conversation, we're getting there, about kind of the gray area between the world of for-profit and non-profit. So if you could, share with us a little bit about, that whole other side of the equation that is
fuzzy,
hybrid,
gray, nuanced area.
There you go.
So if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to think about what impact you want to have, you can sort of think through, is there a big opportunity for revenue generation? We see some business models that are very tech focused, and it's an opportunity sometimes to reach a lot of people in ways that are tech enabled. Others are much more brick and mortar. It's really hands on. You're going to be maybe training people or working with a smaller group of people to have a deeper impact. So you want to think about the kind of capital that's going to best enable that. And most of the entrepreneurs we work with are working with grant funding and equity and debt. Because they find that each of these sort of addresses some different needs that they have in building an enterprise that does have this sort of multiplicity of goals. And the other thing that we're finding really interesting right now, and we've just published a report on this, is ways that people can monetize social impact as a way to create revenue for their business. So everyone thinks that entrepreneurs want investment, but actually entrepreneurs want revenue.
I agree. As an entrepreneur, I would.
They're not like,
a second.
Who wants to take parts of my company? It's like, no, you want to build your business.
You get the jet running.
Exactly. So with this idea of monetizing impact, it's recognizing that if we can start to build markets for impact, whether it's, mitigating carbon or improving biodiversity, reducing plastic waste, that you can not only have your customers, but you can also tap into those impact markets as a way to supplement revenue. And that's a model that we think can really drive social impact, particularly when you're working with low-income customers, because you can take revenue from, let's say, carbon offsets and use it to reduce the price of a product, like a cook stove. And suddenly, instead of selling 10,000 cook stoves, you're selling 100,000 or 1,000,000 cook stoves. So it's this real positive feedback loop, but it really starts with recognizing that a woman purchasing a cook stove and using it to reduce climate impact is contributing to a global solution. And that should benefit her. So again, I think there's a lot of room for creativity. I'm counting on the next generation to start challenging assumptions about how markets can and should work, so that we can really value the things that people actually want in their lives.
So I think that's a perfect note to get to our last question, just to all the Gen Z out there. What's the message? We have a lot of anxiety about the world. we want to make a change. We want to do something. Not always sure how. So words of wisdom to, get us started.
Yeah, I mean, I have kids in that age group, and I can understand completely the anxiety and the cynicism. I think every generation has a fresh opportunity to question assumptions about what came before. So I think even in seeking wisdom, I think always to take it with a grain of salt, to seek wisdom from people who are very honest about their failures so that maybe you can avoid repeating them. But I would say be skeptical of people who tell you how the world works, because often it does come from a place of let's leave it alone, versus saying, how do we do better? How do we make more change? And the thing that I think is so exciting about this moment is that people can find ways to connect with perspectives that are so much more accessible. So talk to other entrepreneurs, leaders, young people all over the world, get different perspectives. But I think that, this is a moment for creativity, and hopefulness, as much as it feels like it's a scary time. The reason I bet on entrepreneurs, and a lot of our work at Acumen is supporting early stage young entrepreneurs, is we think that we don't have the answers, and they're going to come from new generations, more proximate, more attuned to the realities of the world, entrepreneurs, leaders. That's what gives me hope versus kind of looking backwards at everything that's come before.
No, that's beautiful. And it's something that I personally believe a lot. I always say that in the work that I do, I'm not smart enough to solve world problems, but at least if I can help those who are be able to get to where they need to be, that's a life well lived. And, I appreciate you taking the time to share this all with us. You've obviously been a rock star in the industry, and, thank you for choosing to do the work that you do and staying strong and making sure that so many more people can benefit from your energy and time. And of course, for being on our show.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for choosing to share my story and Acumen's story. And I'm really excited for everything that you're building as well.
Thank you. And with that, unfortunately, our session today comes to a close. If you enjoyed today's interview, make sure you keep watching Changing Reality. My name's Harsha, and we're signing off.